This weekend on CityCast Denver. I'm here with my producer, Paul Caroli. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Bree.
So we're doing something different this weekend. We're going to share a little podcast extra. Can you tell our listeners about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's just pause for a second. Do you smell that? Is that redistricting in the air?
I wish it had a smell. It would make it a little bit easier of a topic to cover. It's very complicated.
It is complicated. Oh my gosh. I've talked to, I don't know, a handful of people, like experts, all different perspectives over the last few weeks, and I just could not figure out what's happening, what's important, why it matters. So I am so grateful that we have this bonus episode to share, because our friends at the Get More Smarter podcast, who are these like really fun, smart, lefty, politically savvy guys, Jason Bain and Ian Silveri, they've been around Colorado politics forever. They have all the local politicians on their show. They did an episode about redistricting this week, and they said it was cool if we shared it with you all.
That's awesome, because I know it's an issue that we've been talking about, like you said, for weeks. How do we cover redistricting in an interesting way that brings our listeners into the conversation? And I think Jason and Ian really know how to do it.
Absolutely. And in this episode, they interviewed Evan Wyloge of the Colorado Springs Gazette, who covered redistricting 10 years ago. So he has this interesting perspective to put our current process, which is different from the way we did it 10 years ago, into context. And I love this episode. I think you all are going to like it.
Cool. I can't wait. Well, here's more from the Get More Smarter podcast.
All right, everyone, warm up those brains. It's time once again for the Get More Smarter podcast. This is episode number 88. I'm Jason Bain.
I'm Ian Silveri. Welcome, CityCast Denver listeners. This week on the Get More Smarter podcast, our favorite Colorado insurrectionist joins the U.S. Senate Republican primary. We're taking bets on how badly this ruins GOP chances to beat Michael Bennet in 2022. Our seventh favorite congressperson from Colorado makes us ask, once again, what the hell is wrong with our seventh favorite congressperson from Colorado? The Colorado Republican Party doesn't know the first rule of Fight Club, so they break the hell out of it. And we have another edition of Map Madness, when we discuss the brand new redistricting and reapportionment process in Colorado, and we interview Evan Wyloge, reporter for the various Gazettes and ColoradoPolitics.com, who has had the distinct pleasure of covering this public-political-cartographic process not once, but twice. You'd think that after doing this once in Arizona, you'd never ever want to do this again, but Evan is quite the redistricting reporter.
The man knows his
redistricting.
redistricting.
God.
The man knows his redistricting. I will give him that. We'll talk a little bit more about redistricting in a bit, including our interview with Evan Wyloge. But first, we want to talk about the U.S. Senate race in Colorado in 2022. The Republican side has gotten a little more crowded, and what we would like to refer to as the clown car of the Colorado Senate race has a new driver in State Representative Ron Hanks. This is the same guy who was at the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C. that didn't show up to the first month of the legislative session.
This is the same guy that said that was because he had a
laryngitis,
a sore throat, right? Laryngitis, but he obviously got COVID at the insurrection super spreader event.
Right. This is also the same guy who, if you're a regular listener of this show, you've heard clips from him before, including this fun item about slavery, and that includes a lynching joke.
Being called Mr. Lynch might be a good thing for what I'm about to say. No, just kidding. Going back to the founding and going back to the 3/5, I heard the comments, and I appreciate them and I respect them. But the 3/5 compromise, of course, was an effort by non-slave states to try to reduce the amount of representation that the slave states had. It was not impugning anybody's humanity.
Yep, same guy.
Same guy. Also the same guy who threatened to literally kill House Minority Leader Hugh McKean at some point this legislative session, and later failed in an effort to oust McKean as leader once the session was over.
And to be clear, Hugh McKean is the leader of the Republican caucus, which Hanks is a member.
his own guy, yeah.
This is like trying to choke out your own boss. That's what this is.
And this is the guy that's going to be running for Senate, U.S. Senate. Hanks was also one of 3 Colorado Republicans to recently sign a letter calling for a 50-state audit of the 2020 election. He is all in on the idea that the big lie is true and President Trump is still president, or whatever rabbit hole you want to continue down on into. So the thing that's interesting about this, beyond the fact that Hanks is kind of a disaster in general for the Republicans, he is now basically the only Republican candidate who matters in 2022.
Yep.
What I mean by that is that he probably can't win the general election. I don't know if he can even win a Republican primary, but he's now the most important candidate of the cycle because he keeps 2 stories alive for every other candidate. They're all going to have to talk about the big lie over and over again, and they're all going to have to talk about Republican infighting over and over again because of Ron Hanks. Every candidate, not just Senate candidates, but Heidi Ganahl, the candidate for governor, she's going to have to talk about Ron Hanks. This is a disaster for Republicans.
And it's like it's amazing because like we've been doing this for a long time. I've been here for 15 years, and like every year there's like a new creature that kind of like embodies this role, right? First it's like Doug Bruce in like the 90s and early aughts when he like gets censured in the Colorado House of Representatives for saying something horribly and racist and awful on the floor of the State House. Then you have like Pat Neville and like the Neville clan with the like ultra extreme gun stuff, doing recalls and trying to, you know, eliminate background checks to purchase weapons and concealed carry permits to hide them and whatnot. Then you have like Dave Williams, who comes along a couple of years later and is just kind of a rank and file lunatic who, you know, like falsifies flyers that he says are created by Antifa and distributes them among the good people standing in front of the state capitol. And then you have Ron Hanks, whose real name is Lauren. And we know this because he ran for Congress in California and lost, moved to Colorado, found himself elected to the State House of Representatives, and then all the other things you said happened. And this guy, to your point, is now the standard bearer for the Republican Party in Colorado, and maybe not the like leader in the race for U.S. Senate, but definitely the center of gravity for the United States Senate primary among Republican voters, because now every single thing one Republican wants to talk about, whether it's jobs or COVID or whatever, Ron Hanks is going to kick the wall in and say, no, we got to talk about the big lie. And this is really going to screw up their chances at taking on Bennet, isn't it?
I would think so. And it's going to hurt candidates in every other race, too, because this is not what they need to be talking about. But Hanks is going to force it. And because a lot of political journalists in Colorado are familiar with Hanks, they're going to go to him and ask him what he thinks because they know he's going to spew out something weird.
I swear to God, if we were just like drinking and kicking it around over the weekend and we're like, you know what would like almost guarantee victory for Michael Bennet is if Ron Hanks got into the primary here, like that would probably be it, right?
He would essentially be my preferred candidate as someone who likes Democrats. Also, as a side note, if you could bet on this sort of thing, Ron Hanks would make a great prop bet as the most likely 2022 candidate to physically assault someone in plain view.
Like a Greg Gianforte, governor of Montana, like body slam through the table kind of thing. Right. 100%.
There are enough sports betting commercials on TV in Colorado. I bet we could find one of those sports books to start taking prop bets on the U.S. Senate election.
I bet we could get some action, like some Get More Smarter action on does Ron Hanks like actually commit physical violence against a journalist, political opponent, or other Coloradan throughout this cycle. Like, I would put money on that. I'd like throw $10 at that for sure.
Yeah, it seems almost guaranteed, frankly, and I just hope nobody gets hurt.
Maybe we can come up with a bracket.
But I mean, this is what you were saying, like candidates for other offices like Heidi Ganahl, who like very badly tried to sidestep the big lie question from Alex Burness of The Post, Jesse Paul from The Sun, and Marshall Zellinger of 9 News all at once, kind of face plants in her opening of her gubernatorial campaign a couple weeks ago. Now, all of a sudden, she has to talk about it again because there is an out-and-out insurrectionist big lie supporter in the U.S. Senate primary. So maybe she thought that news cycle was behind her. Unfortunately, I think it's probably still in front of her.
We have one other person who joined the Senate race on the Republican side. His name is Gino Campana.
Who?
Yeah, Gino Campana.
No, I mean, who? But who is that? I heard you.
He's a guy. His name's Gino Campana.
This is all. Hey, dust off the opposition research file for Gino Campana. We don't have one. Who is that?
He's a former Fort Collins City Council member, apparently, a wealthy developer who may self-fund to some extent. I had forgotten this, but he was actually considered as a lieutenant governor running mate for Walker Stapleton when he ran for governor in 2018. So now he's running also for Senate.
I'm sorry, his qualifications are Fort Collins City Council overlooked for lieutenant governor, and now I should be a U.S. senator?
Well, when you consider the rest of the field, that's a pretty strong resume.
Did not contract COVID at the deadly insurrection of the Capitol is his best resume qualification at the moment.
I think this is the case of somebody who, you see this, a lot of candidates end up getting into races because they're essentially a meal ticket for some GOP consultant. In this case, I think somebody like Michael Fortney, who ran Walker Stapleton's campaign in 2018.
How'd that end?
Not well.
Right.
11-point victory by Democrat Jared Polis. And the other reason that Gino Campana is in this race is because here's the other names: Eli Bremer, Ron Hanks, Eric Adland, and Peter Yu.
Jesus Christ.
Nobody knows any of those guys.
I mean, we have talked about the bench being burned for Colorado Republicans on this show a lot over time, but you now have 5 no names running in the U.S. Senate primary, and it's fucking October of the year before.
Yeah, and they're going to be saying who knows what. And and then everyone else is going to have to respond to him. Michael Bennet, probably, he can just go get some popcorn and just go hang out somewhere for a while.
I mean, every time one of these clowns open their mouth, Bennet just gets to send a fundraising email. Did you see what my opponent said today? This is the gift that keeps on giving for this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't think that Michael Bennet was likely to lose his reelection for Senate in 2022. This all but assures it, I think.
Yep, pretty much done for.
This field.
And there are people listening who may think that we will, be proven wrong and we will have our comeuppance. No, we won't, because there is no other Republican left in Colorado who is considering just walking into the buzzsaw of doom that is of all this primary and then the ensuing general election.
Well, you can that's not necessarily true. They keep coming out of the woodwork. They could just show up at any point in the next 9 months. But
you know what? I guess we'll find out together.
Let's talk about our 7th favorite member of Congress from Colorado.
This is the Bo Burt Report.
Shootin'est, Bobtail Wildcat in the West.
Yeah, it's Lauren Boebert of the 3rd Congressional District. If you're unfamiliar with that district, that's the western slope of Colorado, all the way kind of through southern Colorado into Pueblo. It's an enormous geographic district. Lauren Boebert is the freshman congressperson from that district. And she's a regular feature on this show because she says stuff like this in a committee hearing. From what I can tell, she appears to be standing on the deck of her house and rifle. I could be wrong, but anyway, here's what she had to say.
Mr. Chairman, let's call a spade a spade. This bill does nothing to build back better. In fact, it frankly pisses on the American people. It's a political scheme by the Democrats to socialize this country and bankrupt American taxpayers.
She's talking about the infrastructure bill that's being discussed.
The widely supported, highly popular, bipartisan infrastructure bill, that one?
Yeah, but also the same one that apparently is part of a Democratic plot to destroy America, right?
I can't believe she's making propaganda selfie videos from her porch in the middle of a legislative committee. Like, I thought for sure that was just like a ranting nonsense like Twitter video that she does like relatively frequently.
It's sort of like
when she said Mr. Chairman, I was kind of surprised.
It's like, now let's throw it out to Rifle, Colorado and this crazy person.
It's like congressperson on the street interviews like this, like just.
Here is the paradox that is Lauren Boebert. You just heard what she said about Democrats wanting to destroy America, yada, yada. Here she is recently as a guest on a Christian talk show.
Has given me such a low opinion, it's kind of encouraging to hear you say that there's some Democrats out there that have a little bit of sense left.
Yes, well, I really want to share my experiences and my stories with them. And just to sit there and yell at them and tell them how wrong they are isn't going to do anything for anyone. Nothing productive will come of that.
What? That's all you ever do.
I don't, like, why be this? Like, you have a choice to be something else. Why be this?
I don't know. I mean, like, maybe the people that are listening to that Christian talk show, they're like, oh, yeah, she seems very reasonable. And they're not familiar with her. I don't know.
I mean, the last time we played a clip from her taking a religious stage, it was like fire, brimstone, hallelujah. She was like waving a giant Bible around. So I'm not sure that like she does too much code switching for these particular audiences. But, you know, I just think that she's like an intellectually bankrupt, probably stupid person who like doesn't know what she's saying and certainly doesn't mean anything that she says and is just on whatever Twitter talking point that she got from her buddy Matt Gaetz or her, you know, idol Marjorie Taylor Greene at any given moment. She was the lead in a Washington Post story this weekend, or I guess a column by Max Boot, talking about Republicans intentionally embracing idiocy. And the first paragraph was Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert, and we didn't really have to
for example.
Right, for instance.
But this is all a performance, as we've talked about before. And Boebert kind of said the quiet part out loud recently when she talked about how she just looks for scandals to get herself more attention. Listen to this.
But here's the thing, Dan, when I don't see a headline attacking me, I kind of wonder if I'm not doing something right. Like, wait a second, where are the attacks today? I better start something.
Yeah, that's a member of Congress.
I'm like trying to think of the like farmer in Paonia whose like crop got by climate change, or the like, you know, adjunct instructor at Colorado Mesa University who's looking for some reason to stay in the community. Maybe they could make some more money to like continue teaching at the university, like live in the 3rd congressional district, or like somebody in Pueblo who's like green chili operation is like doing okay. And maybe they're thinking about expanding. And this is the person they send to Washington to like fight for their interests. Like all she does is keep tabs and keep score about how much attention she's getting at any given moment, how many likes or retweets she has, how many fake news hits she gets that week. Like the coin of the realm for this person is not how many constituents did I help today? Did I pass any laws to make the lives of my constituents better? It's, did I get attacked today and can I raise money off of it?
And there's a question about, we've touched on before in this podcast, and you hear it a lot elsewhere. Are we playing into her game by talking about her? And I think you can and should ignore most of her stunts, but you have to talk about some of these things.
I mean, it's not like we're summoning her into existence. She's not Beetlejuice. Like, she exists whether or not we say her name. It's just
Lauren Boebert.
Don't do it, bro.
He's behind.
Good thing
me.
It's hard to say 3 times fast.
And he wasn't looking in a mirror, so I think he's safe.
But I agree. I don't think it'll make her go away. Her power is not derived from the Get More Smarter podcast. It is the fact that it is important, I think, to highlight her antics for the people of the 3rd district who will decide whether or not they want to put her or somebody more reasonable who actually represents their community into Congress in the future. Like, you can't just ignore this person. Then you give her the opportunity to just write her own story completely. I think that's worse.
And you have to put it in context. For example, there was she made national news about a week ago because she announced that she had filed paperwork to impeach Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
And no, Jason wasn't misreading the word impeach. He was correctly reading a graphic that Lauren Boebert's staff put out that said, impeach Biden.
Impeach him.
Impeach him now.
Well, when she was talking about the The infrastructure bill, pissing on the American people, there's her pee right there. She left it in the committee.
Come on.
There's no P in impeachment. Yes, there is.
There's no P in impeachment. It's in my committee testimony.
But the context here is it's important to point out the absurdity. It's fun to laugh at this mistake, but also to note that this is like the 7th time a Republican member of Congress has filed to impeach Joe Biden in 9 months.
Yeah, when she put this out and corrected the misspelling or whatever, she was like, and I'm so glad to have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mo Brooks and the same Louis Gohmert, usual suspect, team of 6 idiots join up on my doomed, ill-fated, because this is all just both sides bullshit, right? It's like Democrats impeached Trump twice. Why? Because he lied relentlessly and then tried to overthrow the government and overturn the results of an election that he lost. Those are pretty good reasons to impeach somebody. They're trying to impeach Joe Biden. Why? Because they don't like the fact that he's spending money on things.
Marjorie Taylor Greene filed impeachment paperwork 3 days after Biden took office.
Yep. And Lauren Boebert is just diet Marjorie Taylor Greene, so it all makes sense. That she would wait, several months to have the same bad, doomed idea.
I think they're on a text chat all together, and they're like, all right,
I think
who
they have
gets
a
to
text
do
chat
impeachment?
I think they have a text chat, and then I think they have one without Boebert.
Let's move on to talking about another problem that plagues the Colorado Republican Party in the name Tina Peters, which may be familiar to you from reading a newspaper at all in the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks. She's the Mesa County clerk and recorder who got caught breaking into her own computer system in order to try to prove that there was fraud in the 2020 election. All she ended up really proving was that there are people in elected office who are trying to break things. Tina Peters also was in Texas for 4 or 5 weeks after news first came out that she was being investigated by the Secretary of State, the district attorney, the attorney general, and the FBI. And she's since recently come back to Colorado.
That's what we call the investigation trifecta.
That's a quadruplet.
Your local law enforcement, your state law enforcement, and federal law enforcement all looking for you at the same time.
And her benefactor is My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, which will make this jingle make more sense to you.
Pillow Talk with Tina.
There is a definite attempt to take over the western slope of Colorado.
So Colorado Republicans are learning or trying to teach each other about the first rule of Fight Club, which is, don't talk about Fight Club.
And the second rule of Fight Club is don't screenshot texts from your party chairperson and share them on the internet.
Oops. State Republican Party Chair Christy Burton Brown, there was a story recently came out. She was giving a school board candidate advice about what to say regarding Tina Peters. And this was not good. She says, I don't know everything yet, but I'd suggest our candidates not say anything publicly because there are still a number of facts that need to be discovered. I've seen what's being claimed by some of election integrity people, but there are also claims that the video camera in the clerk's office was shut off and that a ballot marking tool was stolen. Parentheses, not public info. Good call there.
Not yet.
It is now. Continuing with that quote, if that's true and it's still a big if, the clerk may be in big trouble. So because we don't know all the facts, it's probably ideal for all our candidates to wait. Yeah.
Wow.
That didn't work. That went public.
I still want to know how the theft of the ballot marking tool, how does KBB know that Christy Burton Brown, chairwoman of the Colorado Republican Party, and the various law enforcement agencies investigating this situation don't? Is this new information to them too? How does she know it? Did she talk to Tina Peters? What is going on here?
Is that different than a pen? A ballot marking tool?
It's like a big dauber, from you go to bingo night, you get the big ballot marking dauber.
The best part about this whole story, though, is that now supporters of Tina Peters are mad at Christy Burton Brown for not being a true believer in the big lie and blindly supporting Tina Peters. Yeah,
because Tina Peters is a hero, on Telegram, right? And in Mike Lindell's like social media website, whatever that was called. That's where she exists as a scion of democracy and a protector of elections in the fantasy world that like the right wing like disinformation subjects live in. But here in the real world, I guess where Christy Burton Brown operates at least some of the time, she's not. She's someone who is going to go to prison for like stealing election equipment and trying to prove the big lie.
Nevertheless, Republicans remain completely obsessed with talking about the big lie. As Ernest Lenning reports for Colorado Politics, the El Paso County Republican Party is circulating a candidate questionnaire for school board candidates.
I love this so much.
I'm going to say that twice. School board candidates. Asking them their opinion on the big lie and election security.
But it's worse than that. It's like they're asking them what they think about Dominion. Like, it's not even just like, do you think the election was stolen or whatever? It's like, what are your opinions about this conspiracy theory that we concocted that has been debunked multiple times and is like the subject of billions of dollars of lawsuits?
And has nothing to do with the school board.
Will you be teaching your children about the big lie? Will you be teaching them about the evils of Dominion?
If you're elected to the school board, what will you do to establish diplomatic relations with the Taliban? Like, these are all irrelevant questions for a school board.
Will you take the no tax pledge as a member of the school board?
But Republicans they're helping to make sure that the big lie is the single most important question for the 2022 election. That's not good for Republicans because as we saw with Heidi Ganahl, they can't answer it.
Yeah, it's really funny when Heidi Ganahl is like, this is like a trap question from Democrats. And then like every Republican is asking their own candidates for office about it and every chance they get. Absolutely amazing stuff. Absolutely amazing.
I wonder how many of the questionnaires came back with like Dominion. What's Dominion? I don't even know what you're talking about. Know. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're familiar with it, but that'd be weird to try to answer these questionnaires about things that have nothing to do with what you're trying to run for.
Oh, for sure. And like, what's even weirder is that like for like big dorks like me, Dominion is like a deck building collectible card strategy game. And that's like what it was before any of this. So if I were some of these school board candidates, I'd probably just try like a deck building game. Like, you know, each player has a different deck of cards, draws their hand and like plays their hands and there's a common pool. Like I would just answer about the board game and leave this whole conspiracy theory away from it.
That would really blow some minds, I imagine.
So before we get too much further down the road here, we've got an awesome interview with Evan Wyloge, reporter for the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Denver Gazette, and coloradopolitics.com. He's been covering the redistricting and reapportionment process ever since it got started here earlier this year. Without further ado, our interview with Evan Wyloge of the Colorado Springs Gazette. And now it is our great pleasure to introduce Evan Wyloge of the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Denver Gazette, and coloradopolitics.com. Evan's been covering redistricting and reapportionment for those publications for the entirety of the 2021 redistricting cycle, the first time Colorado's used an independent redistricting and reapportionment commission. Evan Wyloge, welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Let me ask you to start with, how hard has this story been to cover? This is some dry and complicated stuff, but it's very important. And it's a hard thing to mix. From experience, I know how this can be difficult to do. Do you have trouble trying to figure out how to make this interesting to people, even though that they should know it's important?
So sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I was either lucky or unlucky enough, depending on how you look at it, to cover redistricting 10 years ago in Arizona. And I've been thinking about redistricting and how to cover it for 10 years since. It's a topic that fascinated me then, continued to fascinate me, and I followed, court proceedings, litigation that challenged those Arizona maps for several years. And so I felt like I was in a pretty good position, at least, with the kind of baseline knowledge that you would want to have heading into this cycle so that I could pick it up and start reporting. So there are times when the reporting does feel tough in some regard because, it's more like just creating the record of what's going on.
Right.
And, describing how the process is playing out so that there is that record. And other times I've had some opportunities to do some things that I think are a lot more interesting and maybe not the obvious story to go after. And some examples of that are like when I recently did an analysis of all of the comments that were submitted to the commission. That one was a lot of fun, and hopefully that shed a lot of light on this one interesting aspect of the process.
They were all totally normal, right?
Totally normal. Except for
nothing weird going on there.
Except for about 15% of them, which so roughly 1 out of every 7 that I looked at. And I will say that I had looked at all the comments that came in from like April through the end of August. And they did get a bunch after that, and we published the story kind of mid-September. So I was kind of missing some of those last comments, and I know that we did get a lot. It might be worthwhile to go back and redo that analysis. But what I found was that roughly 1 out of 7 had some language that matched verbatim with other comments.
And we're talking like word for word here, right? Like
word for word. It's a way, when you read them, you just recognize, okay, 2 different people did not have these same thoughts in these same words, and sometimes using the same grammatical errors, sometimes making the same factual errors.
It's like, you guys don't know how the M dash works. Why are you trying?
Yeah, exactly. No space before or after. But like, for instance, there was a bunch of comments that came in that talked about how they didn't want Vail County or Breckenridge County.
Eagle County or Summit County.
Yeah, put into their map. So when you see that mistake repeated,
Vail County is such a beautiful place. Breckenridge
really
County.
Is. I try to get out there as often.
It's great for leaf peeping right now. Vail County, Breckenridge County.
And so those sorts of things, I was able to see those. We used some programming that is the same kind of thing that universities and high schools are using to look for plagiarism in papers that get submitted. And I had used this once before several years ago when I was looking at model legislation. And so I kind of had the framework for
like
ALEC
stuff, like when one bill becomes a bill in 20 different states.
Yes, and if you want to talk about that, I would love to talk about that. We can go real deep.
To have a whole another episode on model legislation.
Totally. And maybe it'd be worthwhile to come back and redo that here, at some point. It was a lot of fun when I did that about 5 years ago in Arizona. So I think I lost track of where our question was, though.
No, you were explaining that this is a relatively dry subject to cover, but there are some times you can make it interesting, and especially going in certain directions, like look at all these verbatim plagiarized comments that these sides.
Yeah.
And so can you give us, like, besides the the Vail Breckenridge County screw up, like, were there any sort of like blinking red lights for you in those verbatim comments?
Yeah, well, the commission is prohibited from drawing districts that consider the location of incumbents.
Right.
And there was a bunch of comments, probably about a dozen or so, that all talked about how, I don't want to mess this up, and I think that Berthoud it's a municipality. I don't know if it's a city or a town. I don't know.
Let's call it a county.
Why not just call it a county? There's a little municipality called Berthoud, and it is somewhere up near Longmont, Boulder area. And there were about a dozen comments that came in saying that they felt like they really identified with Joe Neguse, and they really want to be drawn into his district. And they all kind of mentioned this weird thing where they said, we're not some backwards cow town anymore, or something along those lines. and so, it's just odd to see all those same ideas in the same order. And it turned out that it was the mayor pro tem of Berthoud who had written that comment and shared it with some of her friends. And she said she didn't realize that they were all going to copy it verbatim and submit it as well. And she was just trying to make some suggestions.
At the top of the email wasn't copy and paste this message and put it into redistricting.colorado.gov.
Right.
I was just thinking this. Isn't it a little weird that we have everyone on these commissions now know where all these elected officials live?
Yeah, it'd be kind of hard to avoid, right? Because, within about an hour of any of the draft maps being released, I and a handful of other reporters who are covering this topic have posted maps that show where the incumbents live relative to these district proposals.
Right,
So,
but they're not like street addresses or sort of like in Zillow where you see the area of the house, but not like the intersection, right?
yes, and to be sure, we in some cases have slightly moved that little pinpoint just far enough so that no bad actors would get the wrong idea and try to go find some of these folks. We do.
I mean, like as a person who cohabitates with a incumbent state lawmaker, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Anonymity a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah. But I guess, I will say also that it's been a little harder recently to stay up on top of everything that's happening with the commissions because they started just moving so fast with some of their action. And granted, this year got all screwed up for a variety of reasons. And I can go into that. But here they are, working really long working sessions almost on a daily basis over the last several weeks. So it got really tough to follow all those meetings. Obviously, I and a bunch of other reporters covering this were tuned in real closely on the night that the Congressional Commission made their final selection, and we were all up kind of tweeting about it until the early hours of the morning. But, the Legislative Commission is going to be releasing their third, this language here is so funky, their third staff plan draft map. Yes.
And
You
there
said
were
that
meetings about how
perfectly,
to
but
do
it's
this too.
so fucking clunky. Third staff plan draft map.
Yes. The part that's in quotations is the third staff plan. But then you need to clarify that by explaining that it is a map, but only a draft map.
Great band name.
So-
Third staff plan draft map.
That
is a great band name.
That is a great band name.
So this is the same place because the Legislative Commission is about 10 days to 14 days behind the Congressional.
Right.
And so this map that's going to be released today's Tuesday, I imagine this gets released sometime in the next day or two. But the Legislative Commission's maps released today will be the kind of default that gets selected if when they have their final meetings over the coming days, they can't agree on a set of legislative maps with the required voting thresholds. And I'll just throw some more random info at your listeners here. So those thresholds are that in order to adopt a final plan, they have to have a 8 out of 12 supermajority, including 2 of the 4 party unaffiliated commissioners. And
the makeup of the commission is 4 Ds, 4 Rs, 4 Us, and you need a supermajority that includes at least 2 of those unaffiliateds in order to get a map to the court, right?
Exactly.
Super
There
duper
is going to be
majority.
a quiz on the end, yes. Super duper majority. Yeah, it's a super majority with some special requirements.
This is all very clear.
So you've covered redistricting now twice in 2 Western states, once in Arizona in 2011 and once in Colorado in 2021. We're not done yet, but this probably makes you one of the most experienced redistricting reporters in the country because you're in your 30s or something and you only ever could have possibly covered this twice unless you started doing it in like high school or college. So both of these states are Western. Both of them have independent commissions. Arizona's went into effect in 2001, so they had one round of this beforehand. This is Colorado's first experience with an independent commission. Can you tell us a little bit about the process in each state, what the similarities are, what the differences were, and if you have an opinion, what each state is doing better or worse than the other one?
Sure. Let me start by talking a little bit about the structure. So in Arizona, they passed an amendment, that was similar in some regards in the year 2000, and that was called Prop 106. And it established that they were going to have an independent redistricting commission. Theirs is a 5-commissioner makeup where you've got 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated commission chair.
Huh.
And I think there's some valid criticism of that setup because it puts a lot of power in the hands of that one chairperson. And so in the 2001 cycle, you had a chairman who sided almost exclusively with the Republicans. And so the map was perceived, I think rightfully, to have given an edge to the Republicans. The kind of opposite happened in 2011, where you had a chairwoman who sided with the two Democratic commissioners at just about every major decision. And the map was largely perceived as giving an edge to Democrats. And actually, that's been borne out, I think, in their congressional delegation over the decade, because Arizona has 9 congressional districts and 5 election cycles, 9 districts, 45 two-year term decisions there. And of those, there were supposed to be 3 districts that were competitive, but only one of them ever switched hands over the decade, and Democrats won the barest of majorities in that 45. So they would have gotten, what does that make? 28? 18. 20. Can I do math today?
I cannot.
I don't know, man. I do the words. I was following along.
23 and 22. That adds up to 45.
Yes.
So the Democrats won one more congressional seat over the decade. And so I think that there's something to be said for them having worked that process a little bit better. And it all came down to getting a lot of unaffiliated applicants who the party, and both parties do this, feel is going to be more sympathetic to their side of things. And so it's been interesting to watch that in Arizona. This time around, I'm watching a little bit from afar, and I can't quite tell where things are headed in Arizona. Now, back to Colorado. Colorado is different, and Colorado has this 12-member commission, and that arguably really disperses that power in a way that could be a whole lot better. And I think there's some truth to that. California also has a commission with a lot more commissioners on it. And don't ask me how many. I think it's either 14 or 15. 14.
They can't do anything with
a gazillion more people
in California. Right? Exactly.
Right. There's also some other differences that I've picked up on. The Arizona Commission was a lot more, I guess, independent in a regard from their own staff. Here you have nonpartisan legislative staff taking a really active role from the get-go in the process. It's almost like the commission here, or rather the commissions, live within a framework of the nonpartisan legislative staff's kind of purview.
That's true. I did notice that early on, that it seemed like they were really looking to the staff for well, what do we do now? Which is understandable because this is just a short-term thing for these commissioners. So do you think this process worked as it was sort of envisioned when amendments Y and Z were passed? I mean, I know that's a big question to ask, but
no, it's a big question, but it's an important question. And I've had this discussion this week with my editors. Now, an editor is always asking you to see how to distill the big story. And so the conversation came up this week about, did the voters get what they wanted when we voted on this? The answer, unfortunately, I think, is it depends on who you ask. It's one of those kinds of questions, because there is so much wrapped up in the concept of independent redistricting. There's something for everybody. So, if you ask, I think, Republicans in this state what they wanted to see out of redistricting, they would have largely said something about competitive districts and, no protection for incumbents. So did they get that? Well, the incumbents all look pretty safe.
And they got a competitive district, which is the new one, right?
Yeah, there appears to, in this current conception of the map that they've adopted, there is one district that looks competitive. So I don't know if that necessarily hits the mark for what those voters who were interested in those things wanted to see. On the other hand, you might ask some other voters what they really honed in on and wanted to see, and they might tell you that they wanted to see this taken out of the hands of the legislature and, done out in the open with transparency, open meetings and hearings, and designed to gather input from the public. So if you ask, did they accomplish that? I think they did. I mean, they held a lot of meetings. They made it very accessible for people to come down and talk about what they wanted to talk about, submit ideas online, draw maps, and send those to the commission as suggestions.
Cut and paste things.
So in that, cut and paste things, if, it was funny when I saw some interesting reactions to that story. I had people say, oh, well, isn't this just organizers organizing? And sure.
Poorly.
I mean, that's true. And during the legislative session, you guys know, I know, that you'll have, let's just say, a big union bring a lot of members down to the Capitol and get behind a certain idea. That's organizers organizing, right?
Yep.
So same idea. But, there's a line somewhere there, so I hope. Anyway, so those are the big things that I see voters, looking at when they did this. But there was also something else in the amendments that is really relevant this week, and that is preventing any map from being adopted that dilutes the voting power of any racial or language minority. And we are about to see a real big fight over that idea in 1 week from today. So Tuesday, October 12th, there will be oral arguments and a live hearing at the Colorado Supreme Court where they're going to have the commission's attorneys describe how they followed the Constitution and, explain what they did and defend all of their choices. And you're going to have a bunch of other groups who have had a chance to look at those maps, draw their own conclusions, and they're all going to be filing briefs by the end of this week to the Supreme Court. And they're going to either say, this looks great and we support it, or they're going to say, we think the commission failed to follow the Constitution, and we think that these things need to be changed about it, and we think that you, the Supreme Court, should send this map back to the commission and give them some specific things they need to change. And so far, there's been a lot about this dilution issue coming from Hispanic and Latino advocacy organizations, specifically some big ones that are pretty active here on other issues as well. Claro, LULAC, in conjunction with the Campaign Legal Center, and Common Cause. I just saw an email from Common Cause. They're going to be holding a press conference tomorrow to talk about issues that they have and what they're going to be saying. But from what I've heard in talking with some of the attorneys and the folks at these organizations, is they believe that this congressional plan just does not hit the mark, and that it ends up actually diluting minority voices and minority voting power in certain parts of the state, and specifically the current conception of CD3 in the southern half of Colorado. And they also say that they see problems up in the new CD8 because of how parts of Weld County are handled.
Would you say, on the whole then, on the idea of if this is what, did the voters get what they wanted, would you say kind of yes, mostly yes? I'm
gonna take the easy out and say mixed bag.
Mixed bag, yeah. That's fair.
Well, so there's a couple interesting things I think that pop from all the things you just said there, and thanks for that walkthrough. But like, on the one hand, you've got a map that was 11-1. So there were 11 yes votes for this map, 1 no vote. So you had your unaffiliated, every one of them voted for this thing. So you met your threshold of 2. You had all 4 Republican commissioners vote for this, and you had all but 1 Democratic commissioner vote for this. So if this map ends up in front of the court, these arguments go forward. The court says, sorry, commission, you didn't follow this law. It goes back. That's jarring in a way, because this was a large, like it or not, love it or hate it, have problems with it or not, this was an enormous consensus, right? I mean, that was sort of something that I think a lot of people didn't see happening at the beginning of this. Unanimous was like probably the furthest out of reach, although I do think that with some different conversations or politics or whatever, you could have probably gotten to a unanimous vote on this thing. But 11-1 is as close to unanimous as you can get without, right? So if this commission sends an 11-1 map to the court and the court says, sorry, you got to start over again, what's going to happen? Is the court going to say, you got to start over again? You got to move this line over here. You got to what even happens at that point? And then what does the commission do and say, okay, so even if we get a super duper duper majority, it's still not going to be good enough if we don't hit these criteria according to the court. Like, that's the next part of the process. I have no idea what happens.
I think that's when we light the Capitol on fire and just walk away.
So I think nobody knows for sure what exactly is going to happen. I think it's likely that if the court's not satisfied, they'll give some specific instructions to the commission about specific parts of the state. That's my guess, but we'll get to find out pretty soon. And I think that it's important to recognize that when it comes to minority voting protections, my understanding, having covered some of these issues over the years, is that there's not room to compromise on them.
Right.
You know, it's not the case that courts look at these questions and say, well, did you have a lot of consensus? Or did you hit the mark in one part of the state and not in the other, and then that's okay? It's kind of a little bit more of an absolute thing. It's either going to be you did it or you didn't in terms of meeting these requirements. And this dilution issue, some of the people who worked on the amendments have told me was very intentional, and they used language. They've told me, again, I'm not the attorney, I'm not representing any issue here or any side of this, but they've told me that they used this language that came from other court cases and sometimes out of other federal districts in order to strengthen these protections in ways that the courts have already kind of dealt with in some areas, but maybe haven't directly dealt with in our federal district, in the federal appellate system, but also some other case law that comes from other states. And so they will be able to point to some of this case law, even though it hasn't ever been applied in Colorado, and say, look, that language from that case, in 1994 or this case in 1986, it now has direct implications here. And you can't fudge it, you can't get close, you can't compromise, you have to actually show that you've done this. And one of the issues that I think they're going to run into is that the Congressional Commission did not have a official racially polarized voting analysis done. And that's a very specific kind of analysis. The Legislative Commission, on the other hand, did have one done. And they had an expert who has worked on those issues over decades put together a very thorough, detailed analysis that explains to them, here's what we see in the numbers. Here's where we see minority populations and the voting patterns that require minority voter protections. Because it's not a super simple analysis. They have to meet some very specific criteria that have to do with where the minority group votes together and also where neighboring non-minority groups vote also together but against that minority group. And then what to do when you encounter that. So
this could go on forever then, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, this conversation would never end, theoretically.
Well, except that they, like in Arizona 10 years ago, they had these same official reports prepared. And once they get it, then they usually have the author come in and they'll have their lawyer for the commission, and then the commissioners and the staff and that expert all have a discussion about this. And they'll usually walk away from that and have that report with some idea about, okay, here's what we actually need to do in order to have these maps pass muster. And so the commission is going to have to defend their decisions with these districts without having done that analysis, where an organization like LULAC has already done that analysis. They did at least a partial analysis of the same issues, and you do it by, they did it using a method called homogeneous precinct block voting analysis.
Now you're just making up words, I think.
I know. Again, there's going to be a quiz at the end. So what they do is they look at precincts that are, as close to 100% white, and then they look at precincts that are as close as they can find to 100%, in this case, Hispanic. And then they look at all of those precincts that kind of hit close to those numbers and see whether or not they are voting divergent. And the group LULAC, a pretty active Latino advocacy organization, they said that they absolutely see what they believe is the indication that these conditions are met, and that they require those districts to be drawn in a way that's going to empower those minority groups to at least have an influence on the elections. And so there's this concern that's been voiced that in CD3, as it was adopted, there is a sizable enough group of Hispanic and Latino voters, and that the makeup of that district, because it is going to lean about 10 points Republican based on previous election data and voter registration, that they are set up to be defeated, the Hispanic and Latino voters in that district. And so they're going to argue that that district in particular needs to be drawn differently. And then there's going to be a similar conversation about CD8.
So real quick follow-up on that, and then we got to move on to some of the other stories you've broken and covered throughout this thing, because this is such a deep and heavy subject matter. We could probably have a 10-hour conversation about it. But I do wonder, and I've tried to have the conversation with a couple folks, and I get a little bit of mixed answers. So first of all, you have this conflation between partisanship and like ethnic voting blocks, right? Where it's like, okay, so we've jammed all these Latinx voters into this one district that is Republican plus 10. It is clear in Colorado that Latino Hispanic voters tend to vote for Democrats. So politically, you've diluted their vote and or racially. So you have these two things that are kind of competing with each other, whereas preserving communities of interest is a higher ranked priority the commission must follow than sort of partisan competitiveness, right? So you have those two things fighting with each other. I still can't quite figure out, though, just like objectively, is it better, more equitable, giving these communities of interest more power, preserving them, however you want to look at it, to put large numbers of communities of color in several different districts so that they sort of have veto power or a strong voting bloc in a certain district? Or is it better to create what some folks refer to as a minority-majority district, aka one district that has as close to 51% plus of communities of color, in order to not guarantee, but to give those folks the option to say, we're going to allow you to have a district that we can reasonably assume you will send someone from your own community to represent to either the U.S. House or the state legislature. I don't know which one of those things is actually objectively more better from an equity standpoint. Is it better to have more folks in more districts or many more folks making up the majority of one district?
So it really depends on, like you were describing, which framework is going to be used, whether it's minority-majority districts, which is 50% plus one. Right. And that's where the Federal Voting Rights Act really has a direct effect. And this is part of why there's confusion about what the voter dilution issues here mean. Because, again, the federal VRA, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, deals with those minority-majority districts. And like a lot of those districts were minority-majority black districts in the South. There also happen to be two in Arizona, one Hispanic in the Central Phoenix area, and then another that is both Hispanic and Native American in the southwest part of the state. But there's this other concept of like coalition districts and crossover districts, where that minority voting bloc could be seen when you do this analysis, this racially polarized voting analysis, as coupled with a group of white voters who are going to together have that influence on the elections. The other area where the influence can be observed and kind of worked with in this context is in primary elections, as you all surely know, where if you, let's say, have a district that is 30% Hispanic, well, in that primary, they might actually make up the majority of
Great point.
that Democratic primary voter group. And so they could end up sending a candidate to that general election that is their candidate of choice. And so those are the considerations that come into play with that area of the law that's not just 50% plus one. And I think that there's kind of a growing idea about the first framework that you were describing, where if you create these districts, like in Colorado, like what we're talking about doing is creating 2 districts that each have something close to 30% Hispanic voters.
Right.
You could draw a district, and it would be probably pretty weird, that would be a minority-majority district here in Colorado. But I've heard from a lot of folks who say that really doesn't reflect accurately what these communities, see about themselves in common with other groups. And so it's not worthwhile to necessarily try to get everybody into that single district, because we don't feel like the voters in Greeley and the voters in the San Luis Valley are necessarily a community that belongs together, even though you could theoretically draw that district.
And you could say that they're both Latino or Hispanic heavy, but they're separated by hundreds of miles. So
right. And, there's, I don't know if you've all seen this online application called Dave's Redistricting app.
We've played with quite a few lines ourselves, yeah.
Cool. Yes. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So you know that when you click, after you've drawn a map, you can click over to the statistics area.
Right.
And you can see, and they are using an analysis on that page that reflects that first conception that you were describing, Ian, where you're looking for what is the percent of the population statewide that is Hispanic. And here in Colorado, you're talking 25-ish%, maybe a little bit more. And so then the question is, okay, then what if 25% of the districts, there are 8 districts, of 2 of them, have influence for that minority group?
Right.
And so, and you can gauge that then, it's almost like this bivariate kind of analysis. So you're now saying, okay, could we hit 2 districts that fall somewhere north of 25% or 30% Hispanic or Latino voters? That way we are giving influence to those groups in roughly that number of districts that would make sense statewide. And so I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And we could, like you said, have a much longer discussion about all that.
Wow. That's complicated stuff. So next week on Tuesday, we'll find out if those arguments hold water, or at least we'll begin to hear what the arguments are.
Yes.
Let's switch gears. Jason, you want to go to the next piece here?
You uncovered a couple of big scoops related to what I'll generously say questionable lobbying efforts from a group of Republicans. Can you take us through that story a little bit? What did you find out?
Sure. So coming back to the whole concept here of independent redistricting, we've separated in some large way the process from the normal political apparatus. And so you've got all those same normal political players, and they'd like to have influence. So what they've all come around to this time with this new system is we've got 501c4 nonprofit organizations. These are referred to as dark money groups when they spend in elections. This is not exactly the same situation, so I'm not necessarily going to call them dark money groups, but they don't disclose where they get their money.
Darkish.
But then you can... Yeah, exactly. Dark-ish.
Dark gray money groups.
Gray money, maybe. Yeah. So, but we've got this kind of constellation of these 501c4 organizations that have surrounded the redistricting process. One of them employs Democrats. One of them employs Republicans. There actually, I think, might be 2 employing Democrats. And so you can kind of draw conclusions from who they have employed and working for them. And the story that you're talking about is concerning a few Republican operatives, I guess you could call them. There's a political consultant, 2 former lawmakers who work for this group called Colorado Neighborhood Coalition. And they have one registered lobbyist, Alan Philp. He's a former, I hope I get this right, he's the former executive director of the state Republican Party.
So not like your civic engagement, nonpartisan actor, right? Like the guy, there's a picture of him wearing an elephant hat at the RNC. So he's in there, right?
Yeah. He's definitely got got a strong perspective, I should say. I'll let you all handle the the coloring of those shapes. But they got themselves into this issue where they've got a complaint filed against them because of some of the things that I had reported on, some other folks had reported on. One of those was some meetings that Alan Philp had taken with folks where he helped them draw maps, and then those folks showed up to commissions and told the commissions, these are our maps, nobody else worked on them but us. And specifically, I'm talking about the Colorado Farm Bureau. So they kind of created some problems for themselves in that moment because they had their representative tell the commissions that nobody else had worked on them, and that wasn't the case. And so the Democratic 501c4 working in this space, they worked with some of their lawyers and some of their allies to put together a complaint that essentially said, these Republican operatives working for this other 501c4, they're not following the rules, because we had also documented some contact between the two former lawmakers. That's Republican Greg Brophy and Frank McNulty, also a former Speaker of the House, because they had some contacts with Commissioner of the staff that the Democrats who lodged that complaint said actually qualify as lobbying.
Which is okay if you register as a lobbyist.
Right. Yeah.
Like you're allowed to talk to the commission. You're allowed to be a partisan and talk to the commission. You just have to tell people what you said and when and how much you got paid for it, right?
Yeah, especially. And so the part about this where they're being paid is important, because that means they are essentially a lobbyist, right? The same way that if somebody was being paid by some interest group to go down to the Capitol and lobby against or for legislation, they would have to register as a lobbyist. They're being paid, and that's different from, for instance, when all those union members might show up to the Capitol to advocate for something.
What we refer to in the business as grassroots lobbying, volunteer lobbying versus paid lobbying.
Right. And so the Secretary of State who received that complaint reviewed it and decided it warranted a full investigation. And so they are in that process now. They're looking into whether or not this group and the people who work for it did violate the state's requirements for lobbying disclosures. They also said that Alan Philp, the one registered lobbyist for the group, isn't doing his lobbying disclosures correctly. So at some point, we are anticipating that we'll hear from the Secretary of State on whether or not they are following the rules. And then we'll know, we'll know a little bit more about what's actually required. So that'll be interesting.
Do you think this had an impact on how the commission made decisions? Because they're notoriously nervous about appearing to take sides.
Yeah. And the preliminary staff draft map plan. No. Preliminary staff plan draft map.
It is so fucking clunky.
It's fine. That one was drawn, the commission's staff said, based on some suggestions that came from these 3 rural counties associations. And I could try to name them, but I might get them wrong. But there are 3 organizations, and they each represent kind of a corner of rural Colorado.
It's like Club 20, Action 22, and Progressive 15. Are those the 3?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes I mix up the pro action and the number.
You gotta just kind of be here for long enough, and then the words and the numbers kind of seep into your brain.
Yeah. So the commission had said when they released that first preliminary map that they did draw it based on some of the suggestions they got from those groups. And those groups, it later was revealed, also worked with Colorado Neighborhoods Coalition. And so arguably there's some question there about how much of the influence went into it, et cetera, and how can you trace it back from those maps toward those actors. And I'm certainly not in a position to make that decision, but we may learn more, and especially in the course of this investigation about the lobbying activity. But then the same thing goes for this other story about an incumbent, Representative Matt Soper, a Republican from the western part of the state in the state legislature, who also was on a meeting that was being recorded, and he was telling his folks, I think you guys covered this, he was telling his allies, here's how to go down to the commission and advocate for my interests, but don't tell them.
That was like the funniest part of this whole story. Is like,
he didn't hear this from me, but
commits like the first rule of politics, which is like never ever complete the sentence. Now, I'm not supposed to say this, but
yeah, and maybe double the worst mistake by saying, "Hey, let's make sure that this is being recorded."
Yeah. Right. Let's document this.
Yeah, perhaps some missteps there, but I imagine this will be ancient history by the next time he has to run for office.
So then, what happens? Like, let's say like these complaints go through the process, and it is found that they ought to have registered and they didn't, and they improperly influenced these things. But at the same time, you have these maps being adopted 11-1. You have the Supreme Court, let's just say, rubber stamping them and sending them off to the races. The process gets tainted. These people get found that they've tainted the process, let's just say, for instance. But then does this map become the map that voters end up voting on anyway?
Well, once the flux capacitor hits 88 miles per hour, what will happen is we'll just go back in time.
This is the last fucking thing I would ever want to do, is do this entire thing again. Please, 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 please don't even joke about that. This has been like a grueling couple of months, and we like have to have lines to vote on. 2022 is like not that far away. It's basically 1 year until the ballots drop for the next election.
Yeah, well, realistically, if you needed to redraw a map, you could do it in a matter of hours or maybe a couple of days. Like if you really, really needed to do it and you sat down with some people who know what they're doing and work with mapping and GIS software, which the staff is very qualified to do, and they have very specific things they are told by the court that they have to do, I imagine that they could make changes and they wouldn't take weeks, they wouldn't take months. So I think, it's really exciting. We don't know what's going to happen, but that's definitely a possibility.
But before we let you go, let me ask you this. What percentage of the people who are on the redistricting commissions do you think would do it all over again if they knew 6 months ago what they know now? Like in terms of how long this is going to take?
I'm going to say half.
Wow.
And I say that because I think some of the folks on these commissions, some of these people truly are everyday folks who are not part of the political process. Some of them, though, really are. Mm-hmm. And they come from the political world. They know political processes, and they know kind of that there are games to play and strategies to follow to advantage their side. And so I think that those are the sorts of folks who would probably do it again. Whereas I think some of those other fortunate souls who, aren't familiar with the state legislature or being at the Capitol and watching hearings go for hours and hours, those folks might reconsider, I would guess.
Those are the ones stabbing themselves in the ear with the pencil.
Right.
Well, listen, man, thank you so much for spending some time with us. This is an incredibly complicated process. We're really, really grateful for you to come on, explain some of the stories you wrote, explain your takes are, and we're not even done yet. I mean, the way I've been explaining this to folks is we're kind of in the third quarter of a 4-quarter game. Do you think that's like a fair assessment of where things are kind of right now?
Totally. I think we're about to enter the fourth quarter.
But it's a game that will end. You swear it, right?
Quintuple overtime 2026 redistricting commission meeting.
Hey, it took 5 years for the court cases to shake out in Arizona.
So were they voting on the old maps through those 5 years?
No, there were all these challenges and none of them prevailed. So the maps were, put in place for 2011 and then used for the whole decade, even though those challenges were made and went all the way to the Supreme Court into 2015.
Well, let's hope that the voters in their infinite wisdom got it right in Colorado and that we have some maps to vote on and that those maps stay and that we go forward and this is a fair process. Like, my whole thing was, and forever will be, in Colorado at the present moment, and you don't have to agree or disagree with this, you're nonpartisan, you're a journalist. If there's a fair fight, more often than not, Democrats have been winning them, right? 2016, 2018, 2020, statewide elections, competitive legislative elections or congressional elections. If there's a fair fight, Democrats tend to win them. So we're going to find out. We'll see what kind of political environment we're in 2022, which is the first backlash year to a Democratic president we've had since 2014. We'll see what these maps actually look like, who's running in what districts, and so on and so forth. But we would love to have you back to kind of recap this once the legislative maps get cemented and solidified, and we're just really grateful for your time. Evan Wyloge, Colorado Springs Gazette, Denver Gazette, coloradopolitics.com. Thank you so much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. We all got a lot more smarter about redistricting.
Thanks, guys.
The thing I took away from, I think most from that interview with Wyloge is that everybody involved, well, I shouldn't say everybody, for the most part, everybody involved is trying to do this the right way. It's just incredibly complicated.
Well, you're playing a brand new game with brand new rules, and the players are actually also the referees. So it's like a really weird system that got set up. And like he said, it's the first time we're trying this out. Arizona had the benefit of going through this once before in 2001 before he covered it in 2011, and now they're doing their third try at it. So I imagine like we will be learning things and establishing some norms and rules this time that will come in handy next time. I just, like I said at the end there, I just hope and pray that like we are going to end up with a legislative map or a House and Senate map on the state legislature and a congressional map for U.S. Congress that is functional, that works, that represents Colorado, and that is a fair fight. I really firmly believe that if these maps are drawn in a fair way, Democrats have a pretty good shot of maintaining and expanding power in Colorado because Democrats have been winning more and more elections, even on the statewide level outside of districts, for a very long time here. So we'll find out how this whole thing goes in a couple of weeks when it goes to court in December, when these things are finally finalized, and then next November when we vote on them for the first time. Probably.
We went through on coloradopolls.com some of the winners and losers of the congressional redistricting process. We're not going to go through all of those here. I just wanted to see a couple that maybe stood out to you and then a couple that maybe stood out to me. I'll give you an example. I thought was really interesting that Congressman Jason Crow's district appears to be drawn in a way that makes him all but unbeatable, I think, in the next decade.
Well, he would have been unbeatable in this district anyway. I mean, he took a district Mike Kaufman was winning by a single digit, but a decent spread every year, and then just absolutely destroyed him in 2018 and made it an unwinnable seat for Republicans in 2020 really fast because Jason Crow's a badass. This district is even better than the one that he won twice in a row by big margins. So yeah, Jason Crow's going to be in Congress for the foreseeable future. Congratulations, people of the 6th CD. That is good news for you.
The other Democrat who really benefited from the redistricting process, I think you'd have to say, is Joe Neguse, whose Congressional District 2, which is kind of right now in the Boulder area, northern Colorado-ish. It's being changed somewhat to encompass more of western Colorado, but that's gone from blue to like dark blue. There's no way Neguse is going to lose that race anytime soon.
No, and he's a good candidate anyway, and the district before that was good anyway, and he didn't face a real challenge anyway, but now, yeah, I mean, he can help everybody else with their campaigns because he's not going to have to work very hard. That's a very, very safe district.
On the loser side of things, there are some Republicans in Douglas County, South Denver metro area, who were really hoping that there was a congressional district that was going to work for them to run. Somebody like former House Minority Leader Patrick Neville, former District Attorney George Brockler. They were hoping that Douglas County might get joined with Southern Jefferson County and created a district that could be more winnable for them. The 7th congressional district ended up getting moved down a little bit south around Colorado Springs, but still with the Jefferson County base. So Ed Perlmutter, the incumbent there, is probably still safe.
Yeah, and you were saying that, Neville Brockler and some of these other South Metro Republicans are losers. I would argue that every Republican in the state of Colorado is a loser because now Lauren Boebert is going to be safe forever in all likelihood.
Yeah.
And that means that she's the party's standard bearer forever and ever. She's in her early 30s or something, and she's not going away anytime soon. So every time she says something or does something, every other Republican running in a competitive election is going to have to answer for it. And she is going to be the one whose endorsement makes or breaks primary races, which will doom you in a general. So great job, everybody. Lauren Boebert took over your party in 3 years.
And the only way to get rid of her now is in a Republican primary, most likely.
Good luck with that. I want to say one thing real quick here, though, just on the third while we're here. There's this week, Senator Kerry Donovan kind of announced that she was suspending her fundraising efforts and kind of blasted the Redistricting Commission, and pending sort of massive changes to the map, or at least significant changes to the map, is probably not going to end up running in the third CD. At the moment, where she lives is actually drawn into the second CD, so it's not even in the district. But I do want to say that, not for nothing, the way Kerry's been running this campaign, the amount of fundraising she's had, the amount of momentum she's had, the media she's put out, the good stuff that's been coming from her campaign, and the fact that Lauren Boebert is just such an unbelievably low-quality human being, to say nothing of her candidacy for office. If any Republican can lose this 3rd congressional district, it's Lauren Boebert. And if any Democrat can win this 3rd congressional district, I think it's Kerry Donovan. So, not for nothing, but Kerry, if you're listening, wait it out a little bit longer. Just keep an eye out, see what this thing actually looks like, because I believe that this is a 9-10 point district. She can lose it, you can win it. It's going to be a knockdown, drag out, knife fight, but I would put some money on you. Just saying.
Let's get to a couple of quick hits and then we'll get out of here for this week. Our good example this week for Republicans and performative obstruction, which tends to be all they do these days, is Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Here he is talking about infrastructure discussions.
Well, again, I hope the progressives stand their ground so that nothing happens. That would be the best result. And then when we win in November 2022, we can start reversing the damage of the Biden administration, of the progressive left. And we'll pass real infrastructure programs and bills, and we'll repurpose that $700 billion that isn't even scheduled to be spent until 2022 through 2028.
That's a Republican senator saying, I hope nothing happens on infrastructure.
And this was before he put out disinformation this week saying that vaccines are to blame for the Delta variant.
Oh,
it's a
heck of a guy, that Ron Johnson.
Guy with such a cool name like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, has to be such an epic douchebag. It really sucks.
It does indeed. Speaking of COVID, California announced that it will be requiring vaccinations for school children pending FDA approval of a COVID vaccine for
waste
kids
of a good name,
age 5 through 11. We talked about this last week. Governor Gavin Newsom of California, after his big win in the attempted recall election, came out and said Democrats need to be tougher on vaccine and mask requirements because voters want this. This is what the majority of people are looking at us to do. I think this is a good first step, and I hope it forces other states to follow.
He's right. California has the ability to kind of set tone for the country in ways that most other states just do not and cannot because of the size of their economy, because of the size of their population. They have the ability to kind of be the first ones. This is why when you open up a new mattress, there's an entire tag just for California. They have their own regulations
right.
about materials and whatnot. They can do this. If Rhode Island decided that they were going to do this, they probably wouldn't be setting the tone for the whole country. This is a big deal. This is probably 1 out of 5 school kids in the country live in California. So I do think that there's something to be said for this, kind of leading the country. And Newsom is doubling down on the fact that he knows, poll after poll shows us, his election results show us, and common sense will tell you that vaccine and mask mandates are popular, supported by a large percent of the public, and will hopefully get us out of this thing, unlike any of the plans that these other people are putting forward.
They work.
Donald
Trump, that guy who used to be president, and if you had purged that from your memory, may be moving closer to running in 2024 for president again. As the Washington Post reports, An informal poll of 13 of his current and former advisors indicates that 10 believe he's going to run, 2 say it's a public relations ploy, and 1 other said he was not sure. Trump himself is saying, quote, "We're not supposed to be talking about it yet from the standpoint of campaign finance laws, which frankly are ridiculous."
I bet he thinks that.
Yeah, I think you're going to be happy. Let me put it that way. That's what he says.
There is no difference between the campaign, the grift, and the public relations effort. Like, those are all the same thing. Like, this guy ran for president, didn't think he would win, won, used the office of the president to enrich himself and his family, lost, lied about it, used all of that to rip money out of gullible people's pockets and jam them into his own oversized pants, and is now doing it again.
The story talks about how some Trump advisors are worried that if he declares too early, he'll impact perhaps negatively the 2022 midterm election, which I've said before, I think this is one of the ways that Democrats maintain majorities in Congress is if he does this. There's no way that Trump can possibly stop himself from announcing for president in the next 9 months, is there?
I don't think so. He can't suffer the ego loss. He's still, he gave a speech, I think, in Georgia last week where he said the election was stolen and rigged and all this kind of shit. So he's like not moderating his tone on that at all. And if these guys want to have 2022 be entirely about the big lie and Roe versus Wade, this is about the best thing that could happen to Democrats in the midterm.
Absolutely. And finally, Brian Williams of MSNBC, I'm going to say he wins the internet for the last week of September in this story about right-wing lunatics yelling at school board meetings. He's got the last word, and it's pretty good.
Your children and your children's children will be subjugated.
Oh my God.
They will be asked, have you been a good little Nazi? Hail Fauci!
Perhaps you remember your first edible.
Well played, Brian Williams.
My first edible put me on the ground eating a bag of Cheetos. I don't know what got into that guy's stash, but it's really scary.
That's it for us this week.
Yeah, the Get More Smarter podcast is a production of ColoradoPolls.com and Progress Now Colorado. Your hosts are me, Ian Silveri, and
Jason Bain.
Ethan Black engineers and produces our show. Talene Sample is our intern, and the phenomenal Breakmaster Cylinder made our theme music. Thanks so much to CityCast Denver for cross-posting with us this week. It's been really fun. We hope you guys got more smarter. We certainly got more CityCasted. Mask that face up and vax that ass up. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate the show. Leave us a review on the iTunes store if you got more smarter. It helps a lot. Find us at getmoresmarter.com, and please send all angry, timid, tepid, and non-angry rants to angryrants@getmoresmarter.com, and we will see you next week.